I hope you excuse the frustration. So these same problems keep surfacing. Nothing really changes fundamentally. But all these problems are interlinked. It's hard to keep people staffed, I imagine, when you have violence in the prison system because people aren't getting rehabilitation and they're acting out or not getting mental health care or medical care in these facilities. Tough working environment. You lose employees. When you lose employees, you've got to see one guard for 360 inmates. So there's a vicious cycle here. Core Civic and privatized prisons are a cancer on our penal system. They have managed to figure out a way to circumvent the statutory limitation of one private prison facility in the state of Tennessee by contracting with locals rather than the state. But that's where we see most of our problems. Their unemployment rate, what I heard earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, is worse than the states of correctional officers. We have a real problem under the name of privatized prisons and Core Civic. And we are hearing terrible stories. There's too many undertakers reporting to these Core Civic facilities picking up dead bodies. And I suspect it's because of a lack of sufficient employment and security officers because drugs are getting in and harm is being done to inmates. What power do you have to make these corrections and hold Core Civic accountable? What do you have the power to do and how are you going to do it?
I appreciate your frustrations. We meet with the Core Civic leadership team from the top bottom. We do number of visits to those facilities. We sent the team up to Trousdale and we interviewed those inmates. More often than not, we found that the inmate was just trying to get money from their family members more than there was an issue. I'm not saying there isn't problems at Trousdale. We are doing things. We are moving in the right direction. I don't believe that it's as bad as you make it sound, but I'm not saying that we're perfect. We do have some problems.
I just haven't seen Core Civic be held accountable by anyone. What legal ability do you have to really hold Core Civic accountable? Because they're not contracting directly with the state, they're contracting with locals in 3 out of the 4 cases. Sit down with the parent of someone whose child should have been released from a Core Civic facility, but got killed or died in that window of time where they should have been out, but weren't allowed to or able to because they couldn't complete a program that wasn't available to them. Sit down and listen to those parents. That would re-energize you to keep up your good faith efforts.
Mr. Commissioner, you said, this is not as bad as it seems, but when I look at not only the turnover rate, but also the vacancy rate higher from Core Civic than it is with state-run prisons, this to me is as bad as it seems. We are still endangering staff. We're putting the inmates at risk because we're not providing quality services for them. How are they able to run these prisons with chronic understaffing year over year, but still have increasing profits? And how are we going to be able to hold them accountable with the staffing levels? Let's not make sure they're getting paid the same level that their contract requires if they're not holding up their end of the bargain with the staffing levels.
Core Civic is able to be held accountable. In the event that they don't meet the staffing requirements, they are charged liquidated damages.
But that does not seem to incentivize them. That seems to be a slap on the wrist because that's not affecting their bottom line.
Are inmates who are in our custody, the state's custody, safer today from being a victim of rape than they were in 2020 because this is a repeat finding? I think it's an appropriate question to ask, and I'm not casting dispersions and saying the prisons aren't safe. I'm just trying to get an answer to that specific part.
What we're doing is trying to provide that environment to make it safer. I can't say if someone isn't going to be raped tomorrow. I mean, an aggressor's aggressor. They look and they look for areas that they can perform this function. So that's why we're trying to improve. I believe we are safer, but to sit here and say it's not going to occur, I don't think I can give you that answer.
And Commissioner, I'm not suggesting that y'all are in a position to eliminate it completely. It's a repeat finding. I didn't put it in the report. I'm just wanting to know if we're making progress and inmates are safer from being victimized by rape now than they were in 2020. It's okay to answer that they're not. I mean, I know everyone here wants to make it safer, but we have to acknowledge where we are before we can chart a course forward.
Well, I think some of the findings were based on paperwork that we failed to accomplish, and that would have reduced the finding.
Those of us who don't know anything about prisons think it's prevalent, and to see this as a repeat finding is disturbing to me.
How many times has the state in the last 5 years sued Core Civic for breach of contract or sought liquidated damages from them?
So, as far as lawsuits about breach of contract, I don't believe there have been any. But as far as liquidated damages, there have been a number of instances in which we've sought liquidated damages, $20 million so far that they've paid back in liquidated damages since 2020.
What were those instances for?
Staffing, but there can also be things like security processes related to count, variety of reasons.
You're contracting with somebody, if they're having so many instances where they're getting $20 million of liquidated damages from someone, they generally reevaluate the party with whom they're contracting. This is a company that had total revenues of about $1.85 billion. We have terms in our contracts for a very specific reason, whether they're staffing or whether they're any number of things, compliance with federal laws, regulations, state laws, regulations, they're all breaches of contract. I mean, $20 million in 2-3 years, that's pretty serious. Breaking that contract or ending that contract and stopping doing business with Core Civic, even a consideration, Tennessee Department of Corrections?
No, not at the moment. We value Core Civic as a partner. We have a need for Core Civic.
Of the substantiated cases of sexual abuse, there actually were 40 for staff on inmate, 18 for inmate on inmate. At least in Tennessee, sexual assault in prison is more a problem of staff on inmate versus inmate on inmate. What is it that can be done to reduce this troubling amount of staff on inmate sexual abuse?
We do training in this area with our staff. We investigate all of those, and we ask for prosecution for any case of sexual abuse of an inmate by a staff member. Unfortunate that number is high on staff. You know, we would love to have it as zero. In some cases, we have staff that shouldn't be watching inmates, and these obviously are those that have been identified.
Also important to note that in some of these cases, staff actually engage in relationships with inmates. It's still considered inappropriate, but in many of these cases, unfortunately, they fall for these inmates. And in some cases, after the offender releases, we find out that they're actually, in several of the cases, living with the offenders. So yes, they're inappropriate, but a lot of times it's not necessarily forced. It's a voluntary relationship between the parties, even though it's against the law or inappropriate.
It's the alarming statistics that are happening in TDOC, probably the 5th largest budget line item. We really need to take a serious look at what's costing TDOC money. Core Civic, I think they are a bad actor causing some of these findings. So I think we need to take a serious look at that contract and what clawbacks are in there to hold them accountable. I think we also need to look at what other vendors do we have available in the state because they are causing harm to our inmates, costing the state taxpayers money. As this committee considers how long we're renewing this agency, how we are going forward to make sure Core Civic is held accountable, and also how can we remove some services from Core Civic to rerun in our state-run prisons.
I'm just curious, Core Civic's name has been thrown around here a lot today. Have they requested to testify before this committee or made themselves available to us today?
I'm getting a no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I didn't hear today was a specific time frame during which these issues would be resolved or could be resolved.
The issues that they have to solve are difficult, as we have heard from our discussion, and I think focus by this committee is essential. However, we have to give them time. I am going to make a motion for a 3-year extension.
The recommendation moves forward from this committee for a 3-year extension with a 1-year callback